Okay. All right. Well, thanks for. Oh wait, I need to do something else. All right. Thanks for joining, everybody. This is an ongoing series that we've been doing. At first, it started off as just like a casual chat at the same hour every morning, and that was great for a week. And then, but every now and then we had guest speakers come on, and nothing formal, but kind of offer their unique insights, and that was really good. And I feel like that was a more helpful direction to keep going with these. So we scrapped the daily chats, and it's still daily, but now we maybe have a bit more structure, and we talk to somebody who might be have a very useful point of view at this time. And I thought Samantha Gash would be perfect person to talk to because she is a very impressive human being. She is former lawyer, still lawyer, or I guess do you ever just stop being a lawyer, or?
Oh, no. I feel like I'm always negotiating in life, but I am definitely a former lawyer.
Former lawyer, endurance athlete, social impact queen, fellow survivor castaway. So many things. And she does. She's very much in the corporate speaking world, which is also very interesting. And I'd love to ask some things about that. But just to show you how impressive Sam is, I'll get her to explain because I don't know. Well, I do know now, but can you explain to everybody what a 4 Deserts Grand Slam is? And
okay, so
and this is something that you have done.
Yeah, so it's not 4 desserts Grand Slam, as some people like to think of it as. The 4 Deserts was 4 250-kilometre desert ultramarathon races that are run all in 1 year. And if you do the Grand Slam, obviously you tick them off in 1 year. But I think, so they're in Chile, China, Egypt and Antarctica. So in the hottest, coldest, driest and windiest deserts on Earth. And I think what makes these races probably even more challenging than just the distance and the extreme location is that you have to carry everything that you need to survive in a pack on your back whilst you're actually doing the run. So each of the events go for 5 days. So you've got 5 days worth of clothes, food, your sleep gear, medical supplies. You can never tell on a Zoom call, but I'm like very short human, definitely on the shorter side of life. And I'm pretty much on day 1 of these races carrying about 25% of my body weight on my back. So I think the real cool part of these races is making those critical decisions of what is essential to cross a desert, what is a luxury item. Suggest that probably a bit more critical in my analysis of what's essential.
And how long are you running every day for these things?
So these like the distances change, but all up, each race is 250 Ks. The first 4 days are, pretty much a marathon in distance. And on day 5, you're running anywhere from 70 to 110 Ks. And they call the last stage a ceremonial finish, but sometimes it's a half marathon. And I think a half marathon is never ceremonial. It's always like a bloody slog and always really hard. After doing all that distance, like 5K is still really hard. But the race builds in intensity. But I think the real challenge is knowing the strategy, and particularly when you've never done things so beyond your known and they're so extreme, like there's definitely a degree of adaptation. And I think people who do really well in these adapt into the race and don't go out too hard, and know to focus on day 5 of the race when it's the longest distance.
You talk about it so casually, but you're basically saying for like 5 days you run a marathon every day and you only take the supplies you have in a backpack. It sounds like the worst thing ever. I don't think I could even run a half marathon if I trained for it.
Yeah, I always get said, a lot of people say this to me, like I can't do what you do. I couldn't even run a half marathon. And I think the 2 questions you've got to ask yourself are, well, do you want to run a half marathon, and have you ever tried? And until you answer yes to both those questions, you can't tell me that you couldn't do it.
Yeah, I usually just need somebody to challenge me or say that I can't do it. And then I'm like, oh, hang on, maybe I can do it if you say I
You know,
can't.
and there's no doubt, like I know your mental fortitude, and it's far more about the mental and the physical. In fact, there's this quote from this guy called Ray Zahab, who I actually just interviewed for my last podcast episode. And he says that the challenge of ultra running is 90% mental and the other 10% is all in our heads. And the reason I love that quote, even though it's a statistic that's based off nothing, is that, you know, we don't have to be defined or limited by the things that we thought that we couldn't do. It always just starts with the belief that we're capable of it. And if we believe it, then all of our following actions will be based off the premise that we can. So, you know, a couple of years ago, I ran from the west to the east of India. So it was, you know, 3,500 Ks. It went 77 days long. And there was nothing in my past experience to say that I could do something like that. But I had to believe I had a chance to do it, because if I didn't, I wouldn't have like put a treadmill in a hot yoga studio and trained for like 5 hours at night time when the class is finished at 7 p.m. and 40 degrees. Like I wouldn't have done all the things that actually get me to the start line to give it a crack. So, I mean, in that world and in every world that each of you are in, mindset plays far more of a role than natural talent.
So what kind of mental strategies like have you developed or have you come to form as like part of your way of thinking? Well, I mean, I guess like when I started thinking of who would be great to talk to in the series, that's outside of the photography world, thought of you straight away, because I think this is a time where a lot of people are going to they're going through some adversity and they're going to need mental resilience. And, you know, because like you said before, like this will be temporary. It might change the world forever, but, you know, we'll get back to some semblance of normal at some point. But the tricky part, everyone knows that, but the hard bit is, you know, how do I actually get through that period first? And I was wondering if, you know, because of the running and all the endurance things that you do, like you must have developed like some strategies to like deal with, you know, to encourage yourself to push on and to fight through it and things like that.
Yeah. And I think the first thing with that is the understanding of this unknown space that we're in right now. And I didn't used to be someone that played in the unknown. I still am, but I won't. A type A personality that likes to play in a space where I know that I'm going to be successful in. I thought that I was doing a really good job in my early 20s, but I realized that I would never take opportunities that would possibly challenge like what I thought perceived success was. And it was only after I started to do ultra marathons where I had to work bloody hard to get through it, and then even harder to be good at it. Did I learn that we grow so much more as individuals when we test ourselves in an arena where we have no idea what the outcome will be. And so the way I see the space that we're in right now of, you know, COVID-19 is we're in this unknown zone. And whenever we're going from something that we do know to something that we don't know, there's always this clunky phase in the middle where we're trying to find our way. And I think individuals and organizations right now are trying to find our way. There are a lot of people that are trying to are putting forward solutions, but I think a lot of people are putting solutions to something that they don't even know what the problem is quite yet. And what I will say from I think I'm like a lot of you in the freelance space right now. I can't run my business as I used to. I'm a freelancer. All my income is completely dried up till what I could say potentially the end of 2020. So potentially it's quite a dire situation. My husband's in the same situation. We're both freelancers, so we have no normal income coming into the family. And there is a desire to just jump on and create this ready-made resilience program on the online space. Sorry, you can hear Mark and Harry in the background.
Yeah, I was going to ask, is Mark like throwing around chest of drawers in the background?
No, that's my two-year-old son. That's a part of the unknown, guys. The toddler that's constantly around you. No more daycare. Yeah, like I kind of made this decision that how I show up in the next 90 days will probably influence what clients will choose to work with me in the future. I could go and chase deposits that I thought I had owing to me. I could demand clients to reschedule events that I thought was committed to me at least towards the end of the year, or I could just sit back and just let everyone come to terms with what's a lot of change. And I think that's the first thing. I'm creating space and I'm not hassling people. The next thing I'm doing is I'm actually not asking of any clients to work with me in exchange for finance, which might sound ludicrous. Like, Sam, you've got to think of some kind of solution. What I've decided to do is focus on things that I have put off because I haven't had enough time. Things that when we re-enter the new world will actually prop up my offerings as a corporate speaker, as a resilience expert, as a mindset expert. So I've said for a long time that I've wanted to do a podcast, and I have blamed not enough time as a reason that I haven't done it. And so I basically created a podcast. I always imagined that I'd be doing my podcast interviews live because I'm someone that definitely connects better, face to face. But I was like, no, I've got to pivot. I'm going to create the next best plan. I'm going to start to interview people that I know, but are on the other side of the world, that it would always have been harder to get an interview with them in person. And I'm going to start with them. So that's what I've done. I've launched 2 episodes. It's doing, really well. I'm learning a new skill. I'm learning new levels of how to listen to people, ask questions. And as a professional speaker, I think that's going to really serve me well down the track. The other thing is I'm writing my book. And then the last thing in terms of how can you create value now to people that you previously worked with, I think there are a lot of little things that you can do that aren't asking for a financial return that is going to remind people that you were there for them in the hard times. So I've kind of written down all my existing clients, and I plan to do a very short iPhone video to those clients, thinking about their specific circumstances right now and the challenges that they might face. And I'm going to talk about that and connect it to an element of my keynote. So they've all already heard my keynote. If I can connect something that they're going through right now to what I've shared with them, and just as hey guys, I was thinking of you. You might remember that I spoke about my story when I was in the Sahara Desert, and this certain circumstance happened to me. I feel like we're in that situation right now. So it's something that probably take me half an hour to do for a client, not much time, not asking for anything in exchange, but I think people will remember that down the track. So that's my approach. There's a lot of people that are creating online strategies that they're asking for money for. Some are being received, some are probably low quality. But I've chosen to kind of not pivot that much, just use this time to bolster my previously existing offering.
I think that's such a smart and refreshing way to look at it now, because I think that, and I guess that is probably the instinct of a lot of freelancers who have, deposits on the line and future work that's cancelled. The instinct would be, all right, I got to quickly lock this in. I need this money in me now because it might just disappear. But like you were saying before, and I think it was before some of the people had joined, but do you want to explain about deposits and what you were saying before?
Yeah, so I don't know in the world that you all work in, but typically when I get booked for a speaking engagement, 50% is owing to hold that date. And then the other 50% is given maybe 2 weeks before I actually get up on stage and speak. So, but obviously sometimes it takes time to get that 50% deposit, even if you've got a contract in play. So there are a lot of people in my speaking industry right now that are going and trying to get that 50% deposit. I think back to what is the purpose of a deposit. The purpose of a deposit is to hold a date to stop you from missing another type of opportunity that could occur on that date. But right now, if a gig is cancelled in 2 months down the track, I'm not going to be able to book another talk 2 months down the track right now, because there's not going to be events for over 100 people for quite a long period of time. So when I think of what's the idea of a deposit, maybe it doesn't serve it. I mean, there'll be some people that will still try and get it, but I'm kind of like, yeah, I'm going to lose some money, but I'm probably not going to chase someone really, really hard right now to get that money.
No, because I think in the long term, you know, if somebody is booking you for an event, you know, eventually they'll have that event again. Who knows when, but eventually they'll have it and they'll get you again. You don't need to chase that, create some bad feeling between you and the client, and you don't want to be known as the person who was sniping around trying to.
Oh, word of mouth is really powerful right now, and people talk. And I got three people sent me an email that another speaker sent around, where they type their first sentence of their email was, in a case of perfect timing, when your clients start to ask for online solutions to deal with the situation, I have a ready-made online blah, 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 blah. And so many people send that to me with the words going, what the fuck? How opportunistic? How can you have a ready-made solution to this situation when we've just entered this situation? I just really think there's power in just like taking a deep breath, creating some space, acknowledging that it's not great. Like, let's not be delusional. Like, we know Simon Sinek said a thing recently about realistic optimism, which I think is so powerful right now. And I believe it too. Realistic optimism isn't about just being positive. Like, you don't need to be like foolishly positive right now. But what it's saying is times are a little bit tough, but how can we turn lemons into lemonade? And I think one of the biggest issues that we often have as freelancers is we do not have enough time to create the offerings that we want to the standard that we want them. So this time we may never get again, where we're essentially stuck at home and we have the ability to create. I mean, that's what we're all good at. We're all good in, I think, on this like Zoom right now, like we're creators. Time is something that we typically lack. So like calm down, breathe, and start to create.
Yeah, now's the time to do all those things. Yeah, and now's the time for me to work on my podcast as well, the one that I recorded with Mark maybe 2 years ago, still sitting on my computer somewhere.
No, but I was the same. Like, I went to India, and I took my 6-month-old son at the time to India, and I filmed this incredible ultra marathoner called Milan Somand. He's a supermodel. He's completely paved the way of the female running movement to India. I wanted to do a video podcast series where I didn't just, because of course I was looking for something niche, not just an audio podcast. I wanted to have a video element to it as well. So I went there, created this piece, and then I never felt that it was good enough to be able to put it out into the world. And now I'm like, well, you're never going to be good the first time you do something. And you've just sometimes got to be brave and bold enough to go, I'm going to give this a shot. I'm going to learn along the way. I'm going to, as I even said in my first podcast, I said, please give me patience and grace as I learn to be better in this space. Maybe I will get better and maybe I won't, but I'll never know if I don't try. And I think people appreciate that vulnerability and honesty, that you are growing in this new thing. And that also encourages other people to grow in a new thing as well.
Yeah, I think this is the time to work on all those things where, you know, we've always said to ourselves, you know, we'll get to that later. When there's a little crack, we'll go and do that. But now's that crack in time. Now this is the window to do all of those things. And I think it's been like general atmosphere out there in freelance world has gone up and down. You know, very early on in early days, you know, I shared my what I was going to do in my 14 days of isolation, which was
intense, which was full on.
But because back then that was the start of it. I had thought I'm going to have 14 days and then life's going to kind of like slowly get back to normal. But now, you know, obviously it's a bit longer than 14 days. But that was good that like everybody responded really well to that, and everyone said they were going to do their own challenge in isolation. That was good. And then I started seeing it swing around, and a lot more like memes started floating up that were like, no, you don't have to make a podcast. You don't have to do this. You don't have to do this in your time. Just like, you can just do nothing. And like, I think it's like hovering between those two ends. And obviously the answer is somewhere in the middle.
Yeah.
And you're totally allowed, and it's very helpful to have to zone out and take this time for yourself. But I think everybody needs to keep in mind that this is such a unique time to get your projects done, and you don't have to go crazy and do everything in 14 days. But you're not going to have this time again where everybody else is also doing nothing, and you don't have any FOMO, and the world, you won't feel like the world is, everybody's moving forward, so you have to jump in and move forward with them. And that's the reason like people don't get stuff done that they should. Now's a real unique time where like everything is shut down, no FOMO. You know, it's a real unique time. Like this hopefully won't happen again for a really long time.
There, I mean, you do need space to create. I, in my normal world, I'm traveling a lot. I'm maybe home 2 days, 3 days a week, and the rest I'm on the road. And I have a child, I have a husband, and so life is very full. So right now, I still feel like I'm having space to create, but also space to just being with my family. And our house has never looked so great. I don't know about you guys, but we whatever we do, our family kind of commits pretty fully. So if we're focusing on the home, we focus on the home. So, you know, we've painted, we've got chickens, we've built a chicken coop, we've planted a veggie garden. So like we're kind of doing things that we've always spoken about in a really idealistic view, but that didn't kind of fit in with our corporate work. And now what I kind of hope is that some of the home domesticity side of what we're doing now, I can infiltrate into my life afterwards as well, because the plants are going to be there, and if I don't look after them, they'll die. So like I need to keep incorporating and sustaining that slower pace that I've got now, while still using the time productively. So it totally is a balance, but we have the space to do both.
Yeah, I think this is a dangerous time for me because I'm starting to realize that maybe this right now is my ideal work-life balance. And it's not the crazy travel to a different country every day, which I thought, well, I never had any illusion that was a great balance. But you know, what I've been experiencing the last 2 weeks, I'm still getting work done, but I'm also, I also have time to do everything else. And I'm like, wow, there actually is like a lot of time to do things when I'm not just running around. So, you know, maybe this will have a lasting impact through. Maybe a good one.
I mean, I hope so too. Like, I don't know if anyone else is a parent here, but I've had a lot of my friends who are parents going, I've just realized, are you, Marnie, are you a parent? Yeah. A lot of parents of slightly older children have said to me, I've just realized how much time I spend driving my kids around to activities. And now that kind of has died down, like they actually get to connect with their child and do different activities, and there's just a lot less stress. So I do hope with every set of adversity and where we kind of take ourselves back to ground zero, we are fools to not kind of question how we typically operate. Did we just get a question from someone?
There was one up from Adam, and he's asking about mental training for marathons, because there's obviously the physical side, but mentally, are there any strategies?
My mental kind of a bit of like analysis or homework. The first thing I do is I try and I do a due diligence and a risk mitigation of all the things that might go wrong. And some people go, well, if you focus on all the things that might go wrong, maybe that will deter you. But I'm definitely of the opinion that like knowledge is power. And if I can imagine what might stop me from getting to the finishing line, I can either try and mitigate it, or I can mentally prepare myself that it might happen. And when it does happen, well, it's never as bad as you think it's going to be, because you've already kind of processed it in your mind, and you've potentially visualized how you're going to get to the finishing line. So that's the first thing. I do like a roadmap of all the negative things or all the things that might stop me from getting there. I mentally prepare myself by physically training as much as I can and try and simulate the conditions that I might have out there. As I said, I'll put a treadmill in a hot yoga studio to prepare for going out to India, but I also trained in a cold chamber when I prepped to going to Antarctica. So it's almost like role playing. Like sometimes there's beauty in naivety, but you've also got to prep yourself as much as you can. Like I'm at the moment doing a calendar club challenge, which for every date of April, I'm running the equivalent amount of miles. So on the 1st of April, I'm running 1 mile. On the 10th of April, I'm running 10 miles. And on the 30th of April, I'm running 30 miles. So I can see Jared doing the math, but like that's over 700 kilometers in the month of April. It's fucking stupid. But what I will say is a guy called Colin O'Brady, who's an adventurer in the US, as well as Jesse Itzler, they've kind of put on this campaign. They put it out a global reach, call out to people. They said anyone who signs up will donate 1 meal to a first line responder in the US. So I did a lot of work like Jared did with social kind of initiatives to support those that were affected by the bushfire. I put together a campaign called the Relief Run, which was people being able to do a virtual 5K or half marathon over a weekend, donating $50 to the Australian Red Cross. And in the 12 days of the campaign, we raised $1.3 million and 100% went to the Australian Red Cross. It was the first social campaign I've ever done that went viral. And there were a lot of factors that made that the case, and we can chat about that later. But 42% of the donations that were raised of the 20,000 participants were from people in North America. And so when I saw this campaign come up that's very North American driven, and I'd had a lot of people going, what virtual solution are you going to create for the runners of the world? I was like, I don't always need to create something. I can actually support something that's existing. And I actually think those in North America are in a lot more of a dire situation than we personally are in Australia with our healthcare system. And so this was a perfect fit for me. Now, when I talk about like the mental challenge of this, I definitely believe in like adaptation. So, things build up. Like this works perfectly because it's mile 1, mile 2, it gets up. By the end of it, I'm going to be running like six hours a day or walking 6 hours a day. So I'm already planning my strategy of how I'm going to make that work within my day. So I'll head out really early in the morning. Then I'll take my son out for a walk to get a few miles done. I'll break it up throughout the day. I don't know if that answered that question, but what I typically try and do is I set myself up for success, as well as do a checklist of all the things that will potentially stop me from getting there.
I think what you do really well, and this has come up in one of our previous conversation, but there's so many different ways to make revenue or ways to like have an impact, for example, through the bushfire crisis, through what you're an expert in and what you have a passion for. You know, it might be running, it might be ultra marathons, and most people might view that as a very narrow band of what you can do with your life apart from run marathons. But you have turned your experiences and your knowledge in that area into ways you can make money with corporate speaking, or ways you can use your platform and your popularity as a runner. You can use that to start a movement and raise a lot of money for a community. So I think that's a really interesting thing for people to think about, and it comes into something that we've been talking about before, which is passive income, or I guess not so much passive income, but alternate streams of income. And a lot of creatives would be thinking about that now, and how can they, what else can they possibly do? What else could a photographer do now to create value and create work that isn't going outside and taking a photo of somebody, which is where 100% of their income usually comes from. So, you know, everybody's exploring ways of that. I wanted to ask you a little bit about corporate speaking and, you know, how, you know, and just, yeah, how that began. What was the steps that you took to have a career in that?
It happened, and I hate using the word organically, but it actually happened initially organically. And then I worked once again, like in the ultra running space, I worked really fucking hard to be good and be respected in it. So initially, I did the 4 deserts completely separately. I was my final year as a lawyer, and then I entered as a corporate lawyer at Baker and McKenzie, which is the largest international law firm in the world. And I then decided to do, and then I was asked to kind of share my story a bunch of times with an organization called the League of Extraordinary Women, which was the first female entrepreneurial organization. And I just did a bunch of, see you, Maddie. I did a bunch of talks for them, and I was okay at sharing my story. Like my degree is in performing arts and law, so I know how to talk, but I definitely didn't structure my story in a way that gave tangible takeaways for the audience members. So I shared a story, but it was pretty much just an interesting story, and it potentially wasn't particularly relatable. And then I was sponsored by AMP to do a run across the Simpson Desert. And they asked me if in exchange for their sponsorship, would I do a keynote presentation at their quarterly forum? And I'm like, sure, awesome, no problem. And that was really the beginning of it. It's where I received feedback from this guy who brought me in that definitely kind of told me that if you're sharing your story and people don't take anything away from it beyond that's a good story, then you have fell short of your storytelling duties, particularly if you're a keynote speaker and you're being paid. And so then I really spent time in kind of deciding what was the structure of a presentation that could make me relatable and authentic. Because you've got to remember, when I'm talking about running 3,500 kilometers, straight away people could be like, well, that could never be me. I'm going to switch off. So I definitely focused, and I still do to this day, in the first like 30 minutes of my presentation, I talk about the early days. Even though I'm 10 years into my running career, I always still talk about the beginning, because that will be the most relatable to the people in the audience. You know, Jared, the first time that you ever picked up a camera, or the first time that you were paid to do a photography campaign, the lessons that you learned in that space will be the most profound for someone who is not yet in that space versus what you know now. Because it's, again, from a naivety to a base of understanding. And so I initially just kind of did a bit of work on the side. I was still working as a lawyer. I couldn't really fit it in. And then I decided to run across South Africa's Freedom Trail. And it was like 32 days long. And I basically left my job in law, and I was working in finance. And then I left that. And I decided to just ultimately go to the start line of that run, which was an expedition. And I quit every job that I had. And it was the first time in my life that I didn't have something professional waiting for me when I returned home. And I remember standing on that start line of this run that I'd created with a lady from the UK. And I had no idea what the next 32 days would look like, but I also had no idea what the rest of my life would look like. And the previous part of me would have been terrified by that, but it actually, day by day, it became really liberating. And I just feel sometimes when you absolutely let go, which is freaking hard for personalities, but when you let go and you kind of surrender, I've tried to do in the COVID-19 space, I'm surrendering to my circumstances, things actually work out. So about 10 days into that 32-day expedition, I get a phone call from this guy who said, I want to book you for a road show. And I remember going, oh my God, it was $15,000 I would get. And I was like, oh my, and I was like 26 at the time or something like that. And the idea of getting $15,000 when I returned back home, it was all I needed to know to just continue with like the surrender and go, this is all going to work out. And that's really been my kind of mantra for like the last couple of years, to work really in the things that you believe in, with the right type of people, through like genuine desire to develop a relationship, and the meaningful work will flow. And I'm now very discerning over the work that I do. I don't work on campaigns that I don't want to be a part of. I don't accept 90% of the influencer work that comes my way because I don't want to be working in that space. And because of that, I feel like I've gotten to do things that I want to do.
I think it's super encouraging to hear things like that, because it encourages creative people in general, because normally the conflict you face as a creative person is the thought that I have to choose between doing what I'm passionate about or doing something I'm not and making more money. That's usually the conflict that plagues all creative people. But I think when we hear from people like you and other people that are like really successful in what they're doing, you realize that taking the path of the path that's more meaningful to you and it will create more meaningful experiences, and you're gathering stories that way, like that's actually such a more meaningful way to live your life. And if you do it well, it can translate back into making a career out of it, rather than taking the corporate job that you don't like, that you may make more money in the short term and it may be more successful for you, but what experiences are you gathering, what stories are you and what life lessons are you learning, that someone else might want to hear later? Probably not a huge amount.
Yeah, and everyone's different. Like, I think in my early days, I said yes to a lot more security things. And do you guys know, do you remember a guy, an actor called Bud Tingwell? He's passed away now, but he was in The Castle. He's like one of the most iconic old school Australian actors. And his mantra was always say yes. And he felt that led him into all the experiences that he had in his life. So there are different ways of thinking. What my personal opinion is, in the early days when I didn't know what I wanted, I needed to say yes to discover what I wanted. But once I worked out what I wanted, it was about learning how to say no.
So, since you speak to so many corporate people, you're more involved in that world than most without being directly in it, but you are always talking and speaking with corporate. I was curious to see what you thought would be going on in all of their board meetings right now. What are all these like big wigs sitting down and talking about? What are they, are they working out how do we get good PR out of this? What are the opportunities? What are they all thinking, all these big companies?
I think it's varied across the board. I think a lot of them is, how can we pay our staff? How can we pay our staff? How can we retain them? If we can't keep paying them, what's going to happen if we let them go? And then eventually we're going to need to recruit new talent down the track, and that could potentially cost us more. So I think a lot of people right now are trying to desperately work out how to spread the hit so that no one completely suffers. And I've said that to a lot of people. I'm like, how can everyone take a little loss so that so an organization doesn't completely fall apart?
I'm just getting a lot of emails every day from like all these companies and things that I haven't heard of from 5 years, and everyone has a little spin on it. We're helping you through this crisis, blah blah blah. And I'm just wondering, what I'm just so curious to know what their meetings are like to decide these things. Like, this is the angle that we're taking, and you're seeing like many different angles. Some are really good. Some are like, I just read some articles about Amazon today that aren't so good. And,
I think big organizations get it quite tough in times like this, because it doesn't seem like anything that they can do looks particularly right. Like during the bushfire crisis, nothing was enough from the big organizations. And if they were quiet, they got told off. If they did something, it wasn't enough. So I think my feeling is like, we need to have a bit more compassion in this space. And of course, everyone's going to try and have a response because they almost feel like they need to have a response, and not everyone gets it right. And maybe they need to have some better people in their organization that help them with how to use social media, because that's how you connect with people now. It's, the main form of medium to kind of reach mass population. And so there's some companies that are doing it really, really well, and then others are trying to maybe take advantage of the situation. Is there any questions?
Yeah, anyone shout any questions at the end? I know that both of us are totally sick of talking about Survivor. But do you think Survivor taught you anything particularly useful that you I can't tell if you shook your head then or that was just like a natural movement.
Oh no, it was natural. It was natural.
Okay. Do you think Survivor taught you anything useful that has, you know, carried through to your life now? Have you had a shift in perspective in anything?
Yeah, it makes me think, being a freelancer, we typically get to choose who we interact with. And we sometimes take it for granted that when we choose the people that we interact with, you can pick like for like. So when I went onto Survivor, I'd been freelancing for quite a while, and all the people that I were working with typically were kick-ass, strong, empowered women who would always raise up other women. And there was never competitiveness or jealousy, and what you saw is what you got. And then I got into Survivor and I kind of forgot that I wasn't versed in the corporate arena anymore, where there's nuances and people, you know, like the game of Survivor is to like be deceitful and to use information as your ammunition to discredit other people and all that kind of stuff. I was not privy to all that kind of gameplay because the world that I work in, like I just don't choose to do it. So it reminded me of what the corporate arena is probably like, and how lucky I am that I've chosen to work with people that I want to work with.
I just want to give a shout out to Isaac, who seems to be watching this whilst driving. I just clicked on gallery view. Yeah. No, yeah. I mean, I probably learned more through my preparation of going on to Survivor, I think, because I started reading up a lot more. I started reading things like 48 Laws of Power or whatever that book is, and reading a lot more about human behavior and ways to try and influence people. And then actual Survivor, yeah, I think you learn different things, but the most useful stuff I learned was, you know, just trying to get myself in the zone. And yeah,
what I learned is I'm not always, like, I'm very confident with who I am and how I choose to show up. But when you're in an unfamiliar setting of people, like there's sometimes an importance, what I learned from that experience, I think, is not everyone will gel with who you just naturally are, and they'll take time. And the problem with Survivor is people make decisions very quickly. They have to, like things progressing so quickly. And that's why there is a power in that gameplay of like sitting back for the first couple of days and just like letting it absorb in, and then kind of choosing to show up how you think is going to work best with that group. And like the way that you would play Jared, from one season to the next to the next to the next will typically change every single time based on the people that you're working with.
All right, if anyone has questions, now's the time, because I'm going to wrap up with one more thing, unless there's more questions. But I just went on your website and I just saw your tagline: resilience, leadership, and purpose from the smallest girl in the desert. And I particularly like that smallest girl in the desert line, and it mirrors something that a photographer we just spoke to, which Benjamin Von Wong, part of his advice was be the weirdest artist in the room. Close parallels there. And
that's you. You do that well. You do that real well.
But I love it. I haven't quite, no one had articulated it in that way to me before. I suppose it's something I do like naturally, just be weird. But I just love the idea of, taking what is that unique thing about you and owning it and making it your thing. And actually, and I think it takes a while for people to, because probably these traits, being the smallest girl, being the weirdest creative, with being the weirdest person, maybe early on in your life growing up, that's seen as more of a negative thing. People make fun of you for those kind of things. But as you go along life, you realize, no, that's actually my thing, and that can be my advantage, and that's actually what makes me unique and distinguishes me from everybody else. So that's my thing. I'm going to keep telling people, or keep reminding them I'm the smallest girl, and that's why what I do is great.
Think about when you were a kid, what were the things that you were always told off for? So when I was a kid, I was always told off for talking too much and for never sitting still. I now make a very successful career from never sitting still and talking too much to people. And that kind of makes me think about how we choose to parent like our children, in a sense, you know, the things that will sometimes cause us tension because they're not fitting in the mold, and will, you know, we don't want them to get bullied, so we try and like restrain them a little bit. And I'm like, no, like what makes us unique and weird and awkward in our early days can, if fostered in the right way, can what lead us into the path of like success.
Okay, we've got just one last question from Adam, which is, do you have any do you have any like resources that you would recommend that helps you go from corporate lawyer world to more of a world of working for yourself? And that might be something good spot to talk about your own podcasting as well. But if you have any other resources that were particularly good.
Yeah, like a podcast, definitely for me. I mean, I think it's always nice to know that other people have become successful in going on their own, but more importantly, it's kind of refreshing to know that pretty much everyone who's ever gone out on their own has had like a challenge. To know that you're not in the unique for having self-doubt or financial struggles, or, you know, the issues of getting people to come on board to your ideas, like they're not unique. And one thing I will say about this time where we have the space, if you cannot use this time to create something happening that you always thought that you wanted to do, then maybe you have to ask yourself, is that thing really important to me? And that's kind of what I said about the podcast. I'm like, the excuse of time's out the window. So if I don't get this podcast out now, it means I don't really want to do it. And that's the same with my book. So I have a publishing contract with Macmillan in New York. I've had it for 5 freaking years. And I've always found, I know, I can see Michael going, oh, I know, I'm definitely not a good author, but I've always used like, I'm moving around too much to not be able to write it. And like, I kind of said to my husband the other day, if I don't write this book in this time frame right now, I'm never going to write the book. So I think it's just, that's that really good threshold. But in terms of recommendations, I really like the Rich Roll podcast. I do like Tim Ferriss. My friend Kemi Nekvipil has a podcast called The Shift, which it's a short form coaching style podcast that goes through different ways that you can make personal shifts within your life. And it very much empowers you to think of something that's happening in your life that you've got a block and how you can like actually work through it. So it's very specific with the strategies. And I think hopefully my podcast can offer you some solutions moving forward.
What's it called? How do you find it?
It's called the Sam Gash podcast, and it's currently on Spotify and iTunes, but you can also see it. Actually, Michael's been nice enough to put up the link on my website to it. But the first one was actually on the coronavirus. I think sometimes when you're trying to reach out to people, like think of things that are of interest to you. And my first podcast was with an emergency physician who's also an ultra runner. And we talked about, you know, the coronavirus, and it actually got triggered by seeing all those people on Bondi that weekend not adhering to social distancing. And I was like, people clearly are not getting it through the TV. How can I use my forum to at least provide knowledge to my audience? Because that's at the end of the day, you know, at the end of the day, if you're criticizing something so much, move away from criticism and think, well, what can I do to possibly solve this problem? And then the second episode is with the most coolest adventurer, like world-class adventurer. He's a Canadian called Ray Zahab. He's in a film that was narrated by Matt Damon called Running the Sahara, where him and 2 other guys ran all the way across the Sahara Desert, like all the way. They ran every single day on average 70 Ks for 111 days. And they looked at, you know, the water crisis throughout the Saharan Desert. But it's super interesting film, but he has like created a not-for-profit organization. If I've modeled my career off anyone, it's this guy, and he only started running in his 30s. So he also shows that we're never too old to not try something, and we are always, our human potential is explored through experience.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us. I've unmuted people if they want to say anything now. I always forget to like yeah, because like people don't have headphones on, and then like you start hearing things. I could hear Isaac's car driving through the
Sorry about that.
But no, thanks so much for that. That's super helpful.
Guys, do you have any?
Cheers for running it, guys. Awesome.
Yeah, if you have any questions now, feel free to ask them. But also, if you want to ask them all one-on-one, I'm happy for you to just like reach out by Instagram or something like that, and you can do that later if something comes to your mind.
Thanks so much.
Jared,
I've recorded
projects
this.
you got on, mate?
Sorry, what was that?
Oh, do you have? I was gonna say, like, what's like your next major like directing project?
Oh, well, I mean, hey, haven't we all had projects that have just gone down the drain over the last couple of months? I was going, so pretty much every plan that I had for this year is out the window, but it's re-evaluating the time frame. I was, and I still will be doing a 4-person relay run and mountain bike ride across the American Discovery Trail in the United States, using it as an opportunity to explore what happens when human beings belong to something, to other people, environment, and something bigger than themselves. So that project was meant to kick off on June 8th, but we won't be beginning that run on June 8th. So that's from the east in Delaware to the coast in California and San Francisco, obviously on the west. So yeah, we're pivoting that, but the reality is I think that topic, a little bit refocused, will be even more powerful given everything that's going to happen in the next couple of months.
Awesome. Look forward to it. Look forward to having you on my podcast whenever that happens.
You too on mine.
I'm going to try and wait it out because I have enough in the bank that are in person that I can put out now, but I would like to do them all in person. I still don't, the lag and all this stuff that happens with computer things is tricky.
It's
so
100% right. And it doesn't mean that you shouldn't start releasing yours if you've got enough in the bank.
No, I do have about, I don't know how many of the old ones I will use because I did at some point upgrade the equipment and obviously got better at conversing with people in a way that is meant to be heard by other people. I think that's one of the challenges for me to adjust to, was that the podcast format, it's harder than it sounds because it's a private conversation that's meant to be heard by other people. Like it's a one-on-one conversation, but for other people. So that's a weird thing because if it was just a one-on-one conversation, it would go in a way different direction. But because that it's for other people, you've got to have this balance of being like quite intimate, but also in the back of your mind thinking, is this still useful to people? Are we still talking about things that are useful for other people? Yeah, because that was been my challenge. So I don't know how many of the old ones are released, but definitely have. I mean, I've recorded with Passenger twice. He was the first one, and then about 4 months ago, I asked him. And I just was dreading it because he hates things like this. But I was like, I know you've done it before and we used up your valuable time, but can we do it again? Because now I've got a better microphone.
I don't think you should wait for perfection. I just think that's the more than ever, people really buy into people having a crack. And I mean, you only have to watch every single freaking reality TV show ever to be on. We always love the underdog that kind of gets better. If anyone watched Dancing with the Stars, on week 1, Claudia Carlin was amazing. And everyone said she's going to win it. She could never live up that. Celia started, lower down the tracks and then only got better and better. And so she was the undisputed winner of that because Australia loves people who rise, as opposed to start great and just kind of stay at the same level. So I think people would enjoy seeing the journey of what it's like, particularly if you preface it with that at the beginning. Can I see nods from everyone if they agree?
I'm conflicted about acknowledging that I'm learning, and this is why, because I've given out, when I dish out my advice, there's two kind of conflicting things I say to emerging photographers. One is don't be afraid to just start because everybody starts shitty. Obviously So, you know, just go. And like, I should follow that advice with myself. But the other advice I also like to give out is don't make excuses. When you don't put up a photo and say, oh, sorry, you know, I didn't have my tripod this day. It's like, if you have to say the excuse, then just don't put it up. You know, just own it.
That's about a piece of equipment. I feel like when you're talking about your own growth in a space, that's just acknowledging reality. You know, this is the first time I've ever done something. And, you know, the thing is, because I'm a corporate speaker, so everyone maybe has a perception that I'm going to be great as a podcaster, but it's still a new arena. I've never used that type of technology before. So to say that reminds people that we all start from zero at some point. And it certainly encourages people to try new things and not have the expectation that they've got to be perfect at the beginning.
Yeah, it's hard. It's hard. I've always said this. It's hard just being known for something. For being known to be, I'm known for being good at photography, and that's why people follow me. That's why you're along for the journey. And then to say, here's the other thing that I'm doing, and don't expect it to be good. Like, it's gonna be pretty bad. Like just that. Well, I'm gonna do it. Like, there's no question. It's coming out. So have a listen to it when I finally put it out.
Yeah,
When you listen to the intro, you'll see whether I follow your advice or not, whether to acknowledge that I don't think I'm very good.
Well, it depends. It depends if you're using a new episode or an old episode, if you need to.
Well, the thing is, the new ones are also not very good. So.
But I want to thank everyone for tuning in. I know, you know, the world of ultra running is, you know, obviously a different lens than the majority of you, but I think the journey for anyone in a space that we're unfamiliar with and getting better in it, and particularly as a freelancer, there is parallels across the board. And as I said, don't hesitate to reach out to me individually if you have any questions. You know, I have time, so I can genuinely actually spend time answering them now.
Thank you, Sam.
Thanks so much, Jared.
I'm going to end the meeting, everybody. I'm going to end the recording.